Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Hawataria, and I'm the author of Uplifts and Empower, a guide to understanding extreme poverty and poverty alleviation. And this interview series called #Doing the Work. I'm interviewing nonprofit leaders who embody the values of Uplifts and Empower and are contributing to poverty alleviation efforts in their communities and beyond. Today, I'm speaking with Marie-Simone, who is the founder of Vasikana Vedu. Welcome, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Danielle, for having me. It's always an honor to get the time to just talk about what I'm doing, especially with lockdown. Talking to humans is always great. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, to give everyone watching some context, can you just describe what Vasikana Vedu is and how the organization has been able to make an impact in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, so Vasikana Vedu is a nonprofit organization that seeks to address the issue of period poverty in Zimbabwe and hopefully in the future in the entire context of the sub-Saharan African region. Period poverty is a specific mechanism that inhibits girls from having access to sanitary products, which in turn impedes upon the ability to participate in their communities and then in the development of themselves. And so Vasikana Vedu has identified this as an issue, but in the grand scheme of everything, I think our goal really is to emancipate women, emancipate those people who occupy bodies similar to yours and mine. Because within the context of Zimbabwe, simply occupying such a body means that your life, the quality of your life is just not improved upon or is really not factored in with a lot of decision-making processes. And so we have three main pillars that we utilize to address this very issue. The first is information dissemination, because part and parcel of period poverty is a lack of information about reproductive health. And that in itself can impede upon one's ability to take ownership and agency over bodily decisions, especially when it comes to healthcare, which in turn impedes upon your ability to really advocate for yourself and just generally develop to the best of your abilities. The second thing that we do is research. I do believe that on the African continent, we obviously have a lot of research around the issues that are perturbing our communities, but a lot of it does not go out there. A lot of it also comes from a kind of paternalistic lens in which the people who feel like they know what the solution is kind of just conduct their research and then they leave, but it doesn't center the voices of the very people whose lives we're trying to change. And so we do a lot of research because that's really important just to know exactly what the issues are and amplify that in the world over. And the last thing we do is distribution. Obviously, providing sanitary product provisions is of the utmost importance because simply not having this means 1 in 6 girls are not going to be able to attend school. And generally, the trajectory of women is just so much less than that of their male counterparts. And so we specifically give the menstrual cup or the menstrual underwear, and we focus on reusable products specifically because there is a very big intersection between the empowerment of women and climate justice. And so we didn't want to provide a provision that was going to contribute to the very demise that often negatively impact women the most. So we're really pushing also for the fact that we want to encourage responsible sanitary products that will allow these women long-term solutions, but will also give them back control of their communities and the environment that they're in.
Wow, that's so much. That's already such amazing work that you're focusing on. And I love that you mentioned climate justice. I'll definitely bring that up later on. But I wanted to also ask, before we even get into that, what encouraged you to focus specifically on period poverty and reproductive health?
I think for me, I grew up with around a lot of women. I was raised by women. And the one thing that I saw was the common denominator when it came to whether women were allowed to progress beyond what the world had said they were allowed to do was if they were able to receive an education. In all the work that I've done, I've been able to have the opportunities I have because I had access to good education. And a lot of women and girls in Zimbabwe simply do not have that. And so I wanted to focus on what were some of the issues that were causing this. And I think period poverty is one of the most poignant problems when it comes to whether or not women and girls are able to go to school, whether they're able to pursue business, whether they're able to, just develop generally. And so I think that was something that was important for me because I also think when it comes to health, it's really important for you to have ownership of your health, because when you don't have that, then you don't think that you can make decisions about anything else. Because if you yourself can't even have control over your well-being, then you don't even perceive the ability to make decisions about things outside of you as something that's possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a really important point you made too, just the empowerment that comes from being able to like take control of your own health journey as well.
Yeah.
And of course, I guess I'll circle back now to the climate justice piece of that. How did you, how did you recognize that link, and what kind of efforts have you made through Vasikana Vedu to really showcase the importance of that when you're helping the women you work with, and then also beyond that as well?
Yeah. So I think when we started, it was initially because Zimbabwe had a cyclone. And it's like a big bragging point for us that we are in the middle of a rock. And so we don't have cyclones, we don't have hurricanes, we don't have earthquakes. We've never had that issue, but we had one of the first, at least in my lifetime. And so that struck me. And so I began to realize that, okay, we were no longer this country in the middle of a rock that was protected. And so I started to look into a lot of that. And what I realized was that the issue around period poverty got even worse as a result of some of these things. And so the stories I was reading was about women using corn cobs as sanitary products, inserting that intravaginally, because not only do they already just not have the resources to get these products, but when a climate situation occurs, they're blocked off from traveling to where the resources actually are. And so that's kind of how Vasikana Vedu started. And so I was always focused on providing a provision that was not going to contribute to the demise of the women that I wanted to help. And so it's been really great because I think the team that I've worked with, when they are explaining the use of the menstrual cup, are not only explaining it as a sustainable solution that can last the women 10 years, thus removing the need to have this repeat purchase, but they're also talking to them about, look at your communities. What do you notice? Do you notice there's a lot of litter? Where are you throwing your sanitary products typically? And kind of contextualizing that idea. Because I think when it comes to climate justice, a lot of people often struggle to connect because the face of it a lot of the times have been white bodies that are not like ours. And so when we're able to contextualize and remind people that this is not anything new, we are not a wasteful demographic. Like in Zimbabwe, you go and you buy a bottle of something and you take it back and they pay you for that. And so it's in us. Those systems are there. We just have to contextualize it and remind people. And I think what's been great with our outreach is we always emphasize that connection between the product being there for 10 years, but also improving the environment in which the women are living.
Absolutely incredible. And I'm really glad that you spoke a bit too about some of the challenges that the individuals you're working with face as well, trying to access these products, but also purchase them over and over again as well. So what have been some of the biggest challenges that you faced in addressing the stigma around periods and reproductive health in your work? And what kind of efforts have you made to try to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, Zimbabwe, the backdrop of Zimbabwe is a very strong Christian ethic and cultural values that don't really allow for conversations around reproductive health. And so it's very challenging to suggest a product that is being inserted intravaginally because it really comes in conflict with the concept of purity that's projected onto women. And a lot of the times, their worth in their communities is ascribed to their ability to remain pure. And so the product we are proposing kind of comes in conflict with that. And in many ways, conflicts with the very essence of some people's identity. And so it's been a big challenge. We have approached certain organizations and they've said, we're not going to do that, we're not going to provide that. And I think what's been the most frustrating is perhaps the gatekeeping. Before we can even get to the women, those who are supposedly supposed to be finding resources for them are saying, no way, that's not acceptable, we don't do that here. And so I guess the way in which we've been approaching that is, I always believe if you provide people with information, they are better equipped at formulating opinions that will not project it onto them. And so our research was a really big component of that. We had the longitudinal study with 40 women over a year, and we not only had feedback sessions, but we also had them journal their experience. And so now we can actually speak to the feelings that come up when using intravaginal sanitary product, and we can challenge those feelings, and kind of expose them to the many ways in which their worth as a human being, as a woman, is beyond the ability to just remain pure. So I think that's been really successful for us, in that when we're able to show people that we're not just suggesting this from a point of not exactly understanding the nuances in the stigma around intravaginal sanitary products, but we actually have engaged with women who otherwise would not have chosen this had we not gone in, done the workshops, and continuously checked in with them. They're more open to it, because then they know, okay, you're not just bringing this random thing from the West or whatever, but actually it's worked. And so I think that's one way to combat. And I think if we're able to do that in Zimbabwe and just bring up these conversations about what does it mean to be a woman in Zimbabwe, what's important, I think then we're better equipped at addressing some of these cultural stigmas that exist.
That's really incredible. And I'm glad that you mentioned your topic of research, because that was actually kind of ties neatly into my next question as well, which is like, what has your research process been like so far? I just love to hear more details about that, maybe some challenges you face, and then what kind of results have you seen from your research that have helped you to reach out to more people as well, but then also to address some of those things too. So you've kind of already touched on that already, but we'd love to just hear more detail about what that process was like for you, and like what starting the process was like, and then what it actually looked like to, analyze your results as well and apply it to your work.
Yeah, so I mean, we did a longitudinal study. We're doing a study now as well that's a bit different from the initial one. But the first one was because, again, we had been told no by people, and I was just not satisfied with the answer. I wanted to know exactly why there would be the stigma around using this product. And so what we did is we dispensed a variety of products to them. We gave them the menstrual underwear, we gave them the reusable pad, and we also gave them the menstrual cup. We trained them on using all of them. We had a range in age. So we had people who were going to school, or people who had given birth to maybe 2 or 3 children, just so we could also have a wider scope. And in total, there were 40 of them. So over the course of the year, I was not actually here. So I was doing a lot of the research and mobilizing, but I had a wonderful team here who were going to the place that we did the workshop, and they did that 5 times over the course of the year. And they just had feedback. So it was a survey that we had typed out for them. And obviously the questions would change slightly each time, because we were trying to see the difference and the development of their interactions with the different products. But we also gave them journals. And I think that was tantamount, because we were also able to kind of cultivate the nature of kind of tracking your period, which can be really helpful in terms of just understanding what's going on with your body and knowing how to treat it in certain situations. Because if we do workshops and we say, oh, when you're about to have your period, eating this helps, if they don't know when that is, then we can't really say we've made a difference. So that was really helpful. And those journals, I think, were really good for them to kind of flesh out what they were feeling and all of that stuff. And so at the end of that, we then collated everything. So we took the surveys and we took the journal entries, and then we assessed it to understand what exactly was going on. And after that assessment, we also had a follow-up session with them as well, where we asked some follow-up questions just to kind of nail what exactly was coming from the story that they were telling us. That research in particular, I think, showed us quite a few things. First and foremost, we know that certain products don't work for certain age groups because of comfortability and just getting used to your menstrual cycle. But something else that we did find is that the menstrual underwear and the reusable pads were not the best option for them, because in a lot of these areas, you need water to be able to use these provisions efficiently. And so the shelf life of them drastically decreases if you don't have access to good sanitation services. And in the absence of water, they don't last as long. So the women actually told us the cup makes the most sense, which is why we have then gone on to push more for it. Despite the fact that people are kind of uncomfortable when we presented it and everything, we know that the women have said, given the circumstances, this is what makes the most sense. So that was that research. I obviously also had someone who was supervising me when I was doing the research. So in terms of the analysis and everything, I did that luckily because I had some funding as well. So that was good. But I think the research was really great in that we were able then to go to donors and say, hey, we've done this, this is what's going on, and these are the results. So that's kind of our research process. Right now, we're trying to do more research on querying menstruation. So every time I do research, I try to partner up with different organizations here in Zimbabwe because I don't know what I don't know. So it's always important to work with other people. And so now we're kind of looking into what menstruation looks like for those who don't identify as women, but also what the hormonal cycle that often mirrors the menstrual cycle is like for those who don't necessarily shed a uterus lining at the end of the month. So yeah, that's kind of the research process. I hope I've answered the question, but yeah.
Definitely. You definitely have. And you mentioned so many things. I think I'm going to circle back to a couple of things you mentioned, but
Yeah.
I'll shift back to the next question I had in mind, which was just trying to understand now. You've already talked a bit about, the core pillars of what Vasikana Vedu does, some of your research process, some of the challenges you faced. So what does your short-term outlook look like right now for Vasikana Vedu, and where do you see the organization going in the long term as well, and how are you kind of balancing between those two visions as you work on the daily basis of just trying to continue spreading the word, continue helping the individuals you're working with, and then beyond that thinking on a maybe long term bigger picture, where would you like to see yourself like maybe 5-10 years from now in this work?
Yeah, so I think short term we are trying to give the sanitary products to as many women as we can, and to nurture a cultural shift when it comes to periods in Zimbabwe, not only in opening up the conversation and making people more comfortable and more familiar with just having these conversations, but also in the way in which they interact with their periods. And I think using the cup is a very different dynamic of interacting with your period. Something that has often come up is that when you're using the cup, you really have to be intimate with your period. And a lot of people have expressed discomfort because of that, not necessarily because of the insertion or anything like that. So we also really want to push for people to be more engaged with their periods. And because I think there's a lot of detachment when it comes to our periods, fair play, it can be a very horrible experience. It can be very painful, but I think it's a part of our bodies. And I think the more we are in tune with it, I think the better it becomes for us. And so we want to change the entire framework in which we understand our periods here in Zimbabwe, but also give women the provisions. I think long term, then, I think we want to really be able to have enough research to be kind of where organizations that are trying to come in and trying to do reproductive health work can come to us because we know exactly what's going on the ground. It's really important that any interventions that are being put into Zimbabwe, where funding is being pumped in, are being efficient and are actually addressing the issues on the ground. That's a big frustration of mine, I think, is that there's a lot of money that comes in, but it's not being used to create change that will encourage self-sufficiency. And so I want Vasikana Vedu to have enough of a research base whereby if anyone is looking to have any reproductive health organizations or projects here, that they come to us and they're able to utilize our research to ensure the solutions they're providing are really akin to the needs of the people on the ground and are nurturing a self-sufficiency as opposed to a dependency on these certain projects.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you talked about that, because one thing that I really wanted to understand was what the nonprofit space looks like in Zimbabwe right now, especially within the realm of period poverty and reproductive health. And like, how do you think, I mean, we can talk about funding separately, maybe you can like kind of tie it into this answer if you'd like, but just trying to understand like what is the picture like currently, what kind of organizations are currently active, and what kind of organizations do you think should exist if they don't already to help kind of make that transition from short-term aid to really to really working towards like self-sufficiency and the work that's being done as well. Would just love to get a better picture of like what the space looks like right now.
I mean, when it comes to period poverty, there's quite a lot, and I'm very grateful for that. I think people have recognized the need and people are mobilizing, and it genuinely makes me so happy that we are able to recognize that these opportunities should be afforded to everyone in Zimbabwe. And some of these barriers that exist are just so archaic and should not be a thing that we're having to face right now. I do think to an extent, though, we have always, our healthcare framework, I think our political framework has kind of always been around a dependency. So we do tend to assume that as long as a solution is being provided continuously, that we've solved the problem. But I think there needs to be kind of a shift into understanding that we need to address the problem as opposed to symptoms of the problem, in order to become a self-sufficient nation that does not rely on external funding and the need for projects like this to exist. In an ideal world, I definitely think there will be no need for organizations that address period poverty, because at the end of the day, we should be obsolete at some point. But I think what often happens is people will get funding and then they will dispense certain products, which it's always a catch-22, because people on the ground need provisions now, and the provisions that exist are there and they'll always need them, but they will continuously need them. And the cycle will repeat itself if we're not actually addressing the core of what's going on. So I think we need to change the way we look at solving problems, and remove ourselves from, I think, and obviously it's been years of our nation struggling. And so it's often difficult to even conceptualize a Zimbabwe that is standing on its own and does not require so much aid being pumped in. But I do think we have to challenge that. Like, we have to be realist optimistic, like I always say that, because I think it's important for you to want to be useless at some point if you are in the space of helping people and making an impact. So I think that's where I think we need to kind of make a shift. But I will always applaud the fact that there's numerous people out there who are mobilizing and providing provisions to people when they need them. But I do think when the dust settles, we'll all need to figure out how can we make it so that this is not a problem that requires these organizations to exist anymore.
So how has the pandemic changed how people work and interact with their communities in the nonprofit space?
Well, I think what has been the most challenging when it comes to the type of work that we are trying to do is that we really do rely on meeting up in a group as a community, because in doing so, we create a community in which women feel comfortable talking about issues with the other women who've been in the workshops with them, so on and so forth. And also just generally, I think we are trying to reach women who are in some of the most remote places in this country. And I think since January of this year, Zimbabwe has been on complete lockdown up until about 2 weeks ago. So mobility was tough. And I think the third thing that is very challenging is obviously donors and funding has been very stringent, because nobody wants to encourage something that will require people to meet in groups. And so the entire concept of community had to change. I have seen a lot of people move on to online. And I think we've all been learners and growers in the past year of figuring out how to nurture community online. And I think there's a lot of benefits, of course, because not only are you able to reach certain people in different places, but once you reach them, they can spark up a conversation with the people who they're with in close proximity with. And so the impact of your community that you're forming becomes much larger. But there's obviously the fact that the demographic that we're impacting is going to change, because you need to have resources to be able to be online. And obviously, if you cannot afford to have sanitary products, the likelihood that you're able to be online is going to be very slim. So that has impacted kind of the groups that we're able to impact, because we can't go as far. And we've had to kind of stay very close and work with those who have access to a working phone in the best of our abilities. But I think it's forced everyone to become creative about the ways in which we can nurture community, even if it's not in person. WhatsApp is a fabulous platform. I think it's something that doesn't require as much internet, but you have to be very smart about the way in which you disseminate information on WhatsApp, because it's not a platform where people can directly engage with you. So you have to think smart about it. But I think Zimbabweans have been really innovative about that, and creating platforms of upwards of like 800 people in a group, and being able to have workshops through that. So that's been really cool. And I think it's been the way in which we've kind of had to change things. But I would be lying if I said there wasn't a halt in our work to an extent. And I think this is across the board for different organizations, because we do rely on having that face-to-face contact, especially when you're explaining an intravaginal sanitary product. It is very important to be there in person, but we've gotten creative. So I think hopefully moving forward, this creativity means we can reach more people without physically having to go there as well.
I'm really glad you dug into the kind of the core parts of how you nurture community through your work as well. That was one thing I really wanted to hear more about, was how you're able to spread the word about what you're doing, but also reach more people and doing that as well. So it sounds like the core parts of that are through WhatsApp and social media, and maybe even face-to-face interactions beyond that. So would you say that the core to now having to leverage more like virtual opportunities too? Like what kind of tools do you use to communicate and spread the word? I guess before, like pre-COVID, but now post as well, beyond like some of the things that you've already kind of touched on.
It's always just, if I hear about, and we're able to create a very vast and expansive network in which we are hitting all the target areas. I remember at the start of my work in the reproductive health space, I attended a conference, and was such a valuable, because there I saw the ability for people to say, okay, I hear you're doing this work and you're doing this work and we're in this area, maybe we can come together. So we're covering that blind spot that exists, but not many people did that. Many people were kind of, this is what I'm doing, this is the area I'm working in, and that's it. But I think the fact that we have that culture is something that we need to really monopolize on. And just, if you hear someone is doing certain work and it kind of aligns, or if you yourself have had people request certain services from you that are not necessarily a focus, and you've heard someone else is doing that, partnerships are always great. So I think that's been the core way in which I have tried to really expand my network, is the moment I hear someone is doing something in the reproductive health space, I am reaching out to them. And I guess my 9 to 5 has also required me to do that, because I can't be in all places at the same time. And we rely a lot on partnerships in being able to disseminate information. And so I think at the core, it's always important for me that in Zimbabwe, if we are to have reproductive health organizations, that everyone is connected. That way, the resources are being distributed equally across the entire region. And we are making sure that if you've had an issue in a certain area when you're providing this service and you learned something, that you can share that with people, so that not 10 more organizations are making the exact same mistake and then putting them back 10 steps backwards. So for me, that's what's been really important, and I think it's been working. Anytime someone or a friend of mine hears of something aligned with what I'm doing, they'll let me know, and I make sure to reach out to them, even if it's not to do a specific workshop per se, but let's talk, let's see what you're doing, so that when I'm doing something, I can think of you again.
That's great. And I'm really glad that you like kind of shared a bit more about the community element of things too, because that's one thing I really highlight in Uplift and Empower, is that importance of, working on these community driven projects first and then expanding beyond, like using your local knowledge first and then using that to kind of apply and scale. But with that in mind too, and this kind of ties back into the question I was asking earlier about, balancing between your short term and long term goals. Would you say that you're working towards expanding beyond Zimbabwe in your work, or do you really want to focus on like your current region now? Do you have plans to expand, and if so, how are you kind of balancing between nurturing the community of support you're building up now and also having that longer term goal of expanding maybe to other regions within Africa, maybe even a global effort to reduce period poverty?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think long term, the goal is to expand to sub-Saharan Africa, because I do think there's a lot of intersections in the kind of source of some of these cultural stigmas, these practices that we have that are often refraining or inhibiting women from being able to really nurture their well-being. And so I do want to expand to that. And I think research is going to be the most pivotal point for that, because I think when we're able to share some of our findings from Zimbabwe, I think that could other people, because I remember at the start of my work there wasn't a lot of research about the context in Zimbabwe, but I was able to piece things together from similar contexts around Zimbabwe. And that was what informed the way in which I kind of formulated the research that I was doing. And I think what research can really do well is to allow you to advocate for policy change. I'm really passionate about that too, because I think we do have similar policy structures in sub-Saharan Africa. Much is ascribed to the fact that we did have the same colonial powers, and that is where we inherited a lot of our policy frameworks. And so they're very similar, and the way in which certain things are discussed are very similar. And so I think in research, then you're able to show, okay, if this is a context that's similar to yours and there was a legislation similar to yours, and this is what can be changed, then you can amplify that to different places. And I think at the end of the day, when it comes to healthcare, policy is something that's very aspirational. It's what people look towards when they're trying to understand how best to handle situations pertaining to the health of other people. So it's really important to have robust healthcare. And I think through research, I'm hoping to be able to do that. So I think Zimbabwe will be the way in which I learn the most. And that's where I think my short term is headed towards, because I still have so much to learn from people. And I think just in terms of providing these interventions and everything, there's always something new that you pick up each time. So Zimbabwe for me is really the place where I've come to learn and grow in understanding the ways in which we can help the communities that we're a part of. And I think once I have a really good foundation in that understanding, I'll be able to amplify that across the sub-Saharan African continent.
It's really exciting, and I'm already excited for you and the future of your work, because I can tell just from our conversation you're so passionate about this and you're so knowledgeable as well. So really excited to continue watching you grow in this space and impact more lives. And actually, I want to circle back again to one of the things that we discussed earlier, which was about funding, fundraising, and being able to just meet costs. Basically, at the end of the day, a lot of this work comes down to what can you afford to, how can you afford to make an impact in your space. And you talked about how there is funding available, but a lot of it is going towards efforts that are very short-term in nature. So can you dig into that a bit more? What kind of funding sources are available to you? Do you use government funding? Do you use crowdfunding? Like how have you been able to sustain yourself so far? And what does that space look like for the average nonprofit in Zimbabwe?
Yeah. I mean, I think when it comes to funding, it's very tough. I will not in any way kind of sugarcoat that, because I think it's a very difficult space. When we started off with Vasikana Vedu, I obviously crowdsourced money. But I do want to note that a lot of that did come from people who were living overseas, who were Zimbabwean. Very few of it came from here, because understandably, our economy is very difficult, and not only difficult in people's ability to give outside of their means, but in simply being able to give. That's also a really big challenge with the nonprofit world here, because you'll apply for grants or you'll try and crowdsource, but because of some of these kind of sanctions that we have, and I don't want to sit here and be like, oh, sanctions are the worst, but our leaders have made some decisions, and that has put some freezes on our ability to mobilize. And so sometimes I'll apply for a grant, I'll get the grant, but they'll say, sorry, you're on a blacklist. Zimbabwe's on a blacklist, so we can't give you the money. So that's also a challenge. And I think even people within Zimbabwe, to be able to give money towards some of these things becomes a bit of a challenge. So I think a lot of the funding sources that I have been very, very blessed to have access to come from the fact that I spent a lot of time abroad. And so I have those resources. And I think in addition to that, when it comes to being able to do this work and sustain myself, I obviously have a 9 to 5, and that's not possible for some people. Some people can't do all this work and then also be working full time. I'm just very lucky that I work from home, and so it works for me. But it's very challenging when it comes to funding. I think a lot of people have definitely relied on crowdsourcing in terms of resources. And I think then that also informs the way in which the solutions we're providing take shape. Obviously, people are more able to buy a pack of pads and donate it. So that's easier, as opposed to buying a menstrual cup. So that's also kind of shifted the way we've been able to create these solutions. But yeah, funding has been a challenge. There are opportunities out there, but you have to be very it's a long process. I've heard of people who've had money sent to someone in South Africa, and then someone from South Africa had to bring the money here, and it's a long process. So funding is there. However, I think there's a lot of economic issues that Zimbabwe faces, and I don't think a lot of people think to the extent that it's going to impact the nonprofit world, because we're applying for funding and they're saying to us, we can't give you the money because we can't send money to a bank that's in Zimbabwe. So
there are even blocks into where the money can even be sent. That's okay. Yeah. So there's that. Mm-hmm. There's kind of like multiple layers of challenges that you're facing along the lines as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I know you've already given me so much information to reflect on, and I'm sure for the individuals watching this as well, things to reflect on too. So for those people who are watching, how can people help you with these efforts? Like, are there ways that people can contribute, either financially or with their time or with donations, and ways for them to support this work?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have our buy one, give one model. That's, I think, we're pushing for that one, because I think, like I told you before, I really want to change the way in which people interact with their menstrual cycle. So our buy one, give one model allows you to buy a cup and a cup will be donated. This is obviously only in Zimbabwe. Shipping is a lot. So that's what we can do. But if you can't do that, then we do have a donation tab on the vasikanavedu.com website. But simply it's just the paypal.me/vasikanavedu. So you can help with that. But if it's not financially, I think at the core of what we're trying to do really, and I always reiterate this, is change the narrative around menstruation. Because a lot of the reasons why we face challenges with girls going to school and access to sanitation services and everything is because the idea of menstruation has been placed as this very taboo topic that we don't engage with enough. So your time is very much valuable to us. If you can engage with us on the social media, I think Instagram and Facebook would be good places to be, because the more you are informed, the more you are able to go and talk to someone or have a conversation with someone who's coming into the age of menarche, and just have a conversation about menstruation, so we can shift the way those who menstruate interact with the entire concept in itself. So I think, yeah, those would be the ways to support us. If it's not fiscal, your time, and like I always say, I would like to get to a point where I'm not useful anymore. I would like it so that, you know, when you have a conversation with someone who's menstruating, the way you talk to them is very different. So that in itself is enough for me.
Incredible. And do you have any, like, I guess, parting words of advice or inspiration for people who would like to do work either similar to yours or just work in the social impact space more broadly? Do you have any tips and advice for people who'd like to uplift and empower their communities on ways that they can do things, you know, similar to your style?
I would definitely say no impact is too small. I think when we get into this space, I think just in general in life, everyone always says if it's not the best, then there's no point of doing it. But with the nonprofit world, what is really nice is that if it's not the best, it's still worth doing. Because if all of us are doing not the best, then that means there's 50 people doing not the best, and there's more people getting help and getting the resources that they need. So even if it is just you working with a very small number with very small resources, it's still very much impactful, and your sense of having an impact will be felt when you interact with people. So you're inhibiting yourself if you don't just start, because you'll really feel the reward and the nature of the impact when you interact with people, and then all I'm saying will make sense, and you'll be able to realize that even if it's not the best, it's still worth taking your time to do it.
Well, thank you so much again. I've definitely learned a lot, and I'm sure people watching this will learn a lot as well. So thank you so much. And I really appreciate you taking the time to answer my questions and share what you're doing with the world. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent.